The Yugoslav Partisans, under the leadership of Josip Broz Tito, represented one of the most effective anti-fascist resistance movements in Europe during the Second World War. In a region marked by ethnic tensions, this movement promoted a patriotism that sought to transcend the divisions that existed in the former Yugoslavia, which on the one hand allowed them to gain broad popular support, while on the other helped them to liberate significant territories in the Balkans by their own means. A well-known aspect that characterized this resistance movement from others was the active and massive integration of women, driven by rhetoric that combined revolutionary ideals with local traditions. The Yugoslav Communist Party created structures such as the Anti-Fascist Front of Women to mobilize them, extending their usual roles in communities, such as caregiving, feeding and nursing, to the war effort. Some also participated directly in armed combat. According to official data compiled from sources such as Jelena Batinić's book entitled Women and Yugoslav Partisans, by the end of the conflict around 2 million women had been part of the partisan movement. Of these, 91 received the Order of the People's Hero, the most prestigious military decoration awarded in partisan Yugoslavia from its founding in 1943 until the end of the war in Europe in May 1945. 71 of these 91 women died during the war, many of them as a result of torture or execution, and one of these women in particular was one whose name and legacy are still well remembered in this region. Lepa Radić was a young Bosnian woman born in 1925 in the small Bosnian village of Gašnica. She joined the Partisans in 1941 at the age of just 15, motivated by her ideological convictions and the context of her country's occupation. Captured by German forces in February 1943, she was sentenced to death and publicly executed by hanging in the town of Bosanska Krupa when she was just 17 years old. But who was Lepa Radić, and what were all the actions she undertook in the partisan struggle during the so-called National Liberation War? Today, we explore the story of Lepa Radić, a young female partisan whose short but dramatic life greatly illustrated what the Yugoslav resistance truly meant to many people in the Balkans. Lepa Svetozara Radić was born on the 19th of December 1925 in the village of Gašnica, located near Bosanska Gradiška in what is now northwestern Bosnia and Herzegovina. She came from a poor Bosnian Serb family and was the second of 3 siblings. Her parents, Svetozar and Milka Radić, faced the typical difficulties of rural life in the Kingdom of Yugoslavia during the 1930s. Due to financial constraints, Lepa and her siblings, Dara and Milan, attended schools in villages near Gašnica. From an early age, they were greatly influenced by the ideas of their uncle, Vladeta Radić, an electrician involved in the local labor movement. This proximity would later consolidate their commitment, especially Lepa's, to the communist ideas that were already circulating in the region. In 1939, shortly before turning 14, Lepa and her sister Dara completed their secondary education at a vocational school for women, a 4-year program that emphasized practical skills. After finishing their studies, they returned to the family home in Gašnica. It was in this context that the Second World War burst into their lives. Shortly after the invasion and eventual occupation of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia by Axis forces, the Radić family aligned themselves with Tito's partisans, and in the summer of 1941, Lepa's father Svetozar, her uncles Vojo and Vladeta, and her aunt Jovanka joined this resistance movement. However, in early December of that year, the remaining members of the Radić family were arrested by the Ustasha, including Lepa, her sister Dara, her mother, and her younger brother Milan. They remained in prison in Gradiška for about 20 days until the 23rd of December 1941, when they were released, believed to be with the help of local partisans, although this is not entirely corroborated. Be that as it may, this experience further radicalized Lepa, and at the age of 16, she and Dara became actively involved in the movement, initially joining the Grbovačka partisan company in the village of Grbaci near Kozara. Their initial roles were supportive. They attended a medical course and acted as nurses in makeshift hospitals in the forests, treating the wounded and providing basic care in precarious conditions. After a few months in this role as a nurse, Lepa finally became a combatant in the Grbovačka partisan company. At the same time, her political commitment grew rapidly, and during March and April 1942, she attended a party course, after which, in May 1942, she was admitted as a member of the KPJ, the Communist Party of Yugoslavia. Her company was subsequently sent to the town of Omarska to carry out political work, organizing meetings with local young people and explaining the objectives of the movement led by Marshal Tito. However, the development of the conflict in the region ended up hampering her recruitment work. In June 1942, Axis forces launched the so-called Kozara Offensive, a massive operation to eradicate partisan resistance in the mountainous region of Kozara in northwestern Bosnia. This campaign, also known as Operation West Bosnia, brought together some 31,000 troops under the command of General Lieutenant Friedrich Stahl, including German, Croatian, and Chetnik divisions, with the aim of neutralizing the communist partisan threat to supply routes and key economic interests, such as the iron mines at Uvia. During this offensive, Lepa's father and uncle were killed in action, while her 15-year-old brother Milan was captured and sent to the Jasenovac concentration camp, where he died a few months before the end of the war. The Kozara offensive, which lasted until the end of July 1942, was a tactical success for the Axis forces, as they temporarily regained strategic areas and inflicted heavy casualties on the partisans, with estimates ranging from 1,700 to 2,000 dead. Despite this, the resistance was not completely eradicated, as the surviving partisans continued the fight just a few months later, once they had reorganized their forces. Meanwhile, Lepa was able to continue her work, focusing on recruitment and propaganda, and being part of the creation of the first anti-fascist women's organizations, such as the Anti-Fascist Front of Women and the United Federation of Anti-Fascist Youth. This recruitment and organizational work were crucial to expanding the partisan ranks in areas under enemy control, but the continued offensives by Axis forces, seeking to wipe out Tito's forces once and for all, ended up making this recruitment work difficult once again. In January 1943, faced with the strategic need to continue protecting resources essential to the war effort and fearing a possible Allied landing in the Balkans following defeats in North Africa, German forces launched Operation Weiss, a strategic campaign aimed at surrounding and completely destroying Tito's partisans in the independent state of Croatia. This campaign, planned since December 1942 under the direction of Generaloberst Alexander Löhr, involved a contingent of around 80,000 Axis troops against some 21,000 partisan fighters and some 3,293 wounded who were in a makeshift hospital in the forest. Weiss I, the first of the three phases of this operation, began on the 20th of January and focused on tightening the encirclement of the partisan areas in western Bosnia. It was during this first phase that the famous Battle of the Neretva began on the 9th of February, a confrontation that lasted until the 23rd of March, already in the midst of the second phase of the operation. It was also known in Yugoslav historiography as the Battle for the Wounded, due to the directive issued by Marshal Tito that no wounded soldier or civilian could be left behind, because the Axis forces used to systematically execute prisoners and people with disabilities as a measure of repression, so he prioritized their evacuation. During the early stages of this battle, Lepa had been assigned the task of evacuating civilians and wounded soldiers to temporary shelters located on Germech Mountain. However, on 8 February 1943, while leading the evacuation of 150 civilians, mostly elderly people, women and children, from an area threatened by the Wehrmacht's 369th Croatian Infantry Division, her group was surrounded above the village of Prashtali. Armed only with a rifle, Lepa refused to surrender or disguise herself as a civilian, as some women in her group suggested, urging them to resist even with their bare hands, as she put it. But after exhausting her ammunition, she was finally captured and taken to Bosanska Krupa, along with the refugees in her care. For 3 days, she was subjected to interrogation and torture in order to obtain information about leaders and fellow partisans, but she remained completely silent. After refusing one last time to reveal details about her superiors, she was subjected to a summary trial and sentenced to death by hanging. On the 11th of February 1943, she was driven by car to a wooded area between the tunnel and the Bosanska Krupa railway station. Exhausted, her hands tied with telephone cable, barefoot and wearing only woolen socks, she was led to a tree where some gallows had been improvised using a rope and an ammunition box. Before removing the box, the Germans offered her a pardon in exchange for identifying combatants among those captured. But Lepa simply replied, "I am not a traitor of my people. Those whom you are asking about will reveal themselves when they have succeeded in wiping out all you evildoers to the last man." After placing her on the box, she addressed the gathered inhabitants, urging them to continue the fight and shouting anti-fascist slogans, but her speech was interrupted when the rope tightened. After the hanging, her body remained hanging from the tree for 4 or 5 more days as a warning. 2 years later, in May 1945, photographs of her execution were discovered in the pockets of a German soldier who had fallen during the liberation of Zagreb. Initially catalogued as anonymous, they were reproduced and distributed in Yugoslav museums and archives until a relative finally identified her during a visit to the Museum of the Revolution in Mostar, confirming her identity and contributing to her dissemination as a symbol of partisan resistance during the war. On the 20th of December 1951, by decree of the Presidium of the National People's Assembly of the Federal People's Republic of Yugoslavia, the government posthumously awarded her the Order of the People's Hero in recognition of her actions during the National Liberation War. Until 1974, Lepa was the youngest woman to be considered a hero of the people in the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, when 16-year-old Milka Bosnić was honored with the same recognition. Nevertheless, her contribution, which involved evacuating the wounded during the German offensive of 1943, positioned her among the key figures of the female resistance, symbolizing the role of thousands of women in the partisan movement. Lepa Radić's legacy has transcended time as a symbol of the incredible phenomenon of mass participation by women in the Yugoslav Partisan resistance during the Second World War. As author Jelena Batinić highlights in her book on the subject, her story, and that of many others, reflects the profound changes that took place in the gender norms of the time, driven by the war, Tito's revolution, and the establishment of a communist regime in the country. Batinić also emphasizes how the partisans, by mobilizing millions of women, 2 million according to official estimates, with 100,000 of them as combatants, challenged patriarchal conventions, integrating them into combat and rear roles, a process in which the figure of Lepa was immortalized for her sacrifice. Today, her memory, along with that of other partizankas, is preserved in archives and commemorations that remain a living reminder of the cost of the war waged in the Balkans. In Serbia and Bosnia, streets, schools, youth brigades and monuments honor her name, perpetuating her legacy as a national heroine of the former Yugoslavia.
This is the Mutual Broadcasting System.
That's the tale of a Europe in turmoil.
Upon this battle depends the survival of civilization.